Ex-babysitter gets 3 years in prison in 2019 death of man she injured as a baby. Terry McCurchie, 62, violently shook Benjamin Dowling while babysitting for him in 1984, prosecutors said. She was charged with murder after he died from his injuries 35 years later.
As you come on to the page, kindly hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. And don't forget to put on the notification bell so you can be notified when I drop the next video. Thank you.
A former babysitter in Florida was sentenced on Wednesday to 3 years in prison after she pleaded guilty to manslaughter in the 2019 death of a man whom she had disabled as an infant 35 years earlier, court records show. The woman, Terry McCurchie, 62, had been indicted by a grand jury in 2021 on a first-degree murder charge in the death of Benjamin Dowling, but pleaded guilty to the lesser charge in an arrangement with prosecutors. On July 3, 1984, Ms. McCurchie was babysitting for Mr. Dowling, who was 6 months old, when she violently shook him so hard that he suffered permanent brain damage, according to court records. He died of those injuries in 2019, at age 35. Initially, Ms. McCurchie entered a no-contest plea in 1985 to first-degree attempted murder and aggravated battery of a child, court records show. Ms. McCurchie, who was pregnant at the time, spent weekends in jail until she gave birth, the Associated Press reported. She served 60 days in jail and then served 3 years probation, court records show. A new case against Ms. McCurchie was opened after Mr. Dowling's death, after an autopsy found that it was directly caused by the injuries from 1984, the Broward County State Attorney's Office said in a statement in 2021. Ms. McCurchie was arrested after being indicted by a grand jury in 2021, and released later that year after posting a $100,000 bond. She was ordered on May 29 this year to return to jail, court records show. A lawyer for Ms. McCurchie did not immediately respond to requests for comment on Wednesday. Prosecutors referred to the sentencing memorandum when asked for comment. Under the terms of the plea agreement, Ms. McCurchie's prison term will be followed by 10 years of probation. She was also ordered to write a letter of apology for her actions on July 3, 1984, detailing exactly what had happened that day. In the letter, which her lawyer read at her sentencing in the Broward County Courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on Wednesday, Ms. McCurchie wrote that, "It was in a state of impulse and anger that I struck Benjamin while he and other children were crying," WTVJ, a South Florida television station, reported. "Your life and Benjamin's life were truly harmed by me and I am truly sorry," Ms. McCurchie wrote. Mr. Dowling's parents, Ray and Joe Dowling, specifically requested an apology as part of the plea agreement. "We are pleased that this day is over, but we'll always remember Benjamin," Ms. Dowling told WTVJ on Wednesday. "She will have to live with this." The prosecutor's office said in a statement in 2021 that Mr. Dowling's parents knew something was wrong when Ms. Dowling picked him up from Ms. McCurchie's home on July 3, 1984. The injuries required Mr. Dowling to have several operations, and he depended on a feeding tube inserted into his abdomen throughout the rest of his life. Mr. Dowling's parents said in a statement after the indictment that their son never crawled, fully rolled over, walked, never talked, never fed himself, he never enjoyed a hamburger or an ice cream cone, he could never tell us when he had an itch or anything hurt. When he cried in pain, we as a family and caregivers had to guess as to what was wrong and hope that we could satisfy his need, they said. Benjamin would never know how much he was loved and could never tell others of his love for them. After long denying she hurt Benjamin Dowling, 62-year-old Terry McCurchie admitted she injured Dowling and pleaded guilty to manslaughter in a Broward County courtroom Wednesday. A judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison, followed by 10 years of felony probation. Dowling was 5 months old when doctors told his family he was shaken so badly that nerves were severed, leaving him with severe brain damage. McCurchie pleaded no contest to attempted first-degree murder and aggravated battery on a child in 1985. She was sentenced to weekends in jail for 60 days and 3 years of probation. Dowling spent his entire life severely disabled before he died at age 35 on September 16, 2019. In 2021, prosecutors charged McCurchie with first-degree murder, citing a medical examiner's report that found Dowling's death was a direct result of the injuries he sustained in 1984. Mukherjee was facing life in prison before pleading guilty Wednesday to the lesser manslaughter charge as part of a deal with prosecutors. A mourning family demands accountability. Everyone who knew Benjamin Dowling was better for it, his mother, Ray Dowling, told the court Wednesday. She described the way her son's family and community rallied around him to give him a life with as much opportunity and adventure possible, despite everything that he missed out on. Benjamin never enjoyed a traditional school setting, never went to a homecoming dance, senior prom or graduation. He never drove a car, had a girlfriend, or got to play with his sister or brother, Dowling said. Benjamin was never able to say he loved his mother or father, or any member of his family. Benjamin was profoundly disabled every minute of every day, all 35 years that he lived, because of what Terry Mukherjee did to him while he was in her care on July 3, 1984, she continued. The Dowlings were introduced to a 22-year-old Mukherjee through a cousin of Benjamin's father, Dowling said. They knew Mukherjee was a mother with childcare experience, so they entrusted her with Benjamin's care, she said. Dowling read a passage from a journal she kept 40 years ago, describing the state in which she found her baby boy when she picked him up from Terry's house on that Tuesday in July. He was sitting in his car seat, whiter than a ghost, fists clenched, moaning and gazing into space. He didn't know who I was. I knew something was wrong, and I got out of there as soon as I could, Dowling read. She took Benjamin to the hospital, where she learned he was very ill. The doctors, suspecting trauma, called police, she said. For all intents and purposes, Benjamin's short, 173-day, 5-month and 3-week life was over, she said. As part of her plea agreement, Mukherjee wrote a letter of apology to Benjamin's parents. Her lawyer read that letter aloud in the courtroom Wednesday. I recall being extremely overwhelmed and exhausted while looking after all the children in my home, and it was in this state, out of impulse and anger, that I struck Benjamin while he and other children were crying, the letter read. Your lives, Benjamin's life and well-being were all harmed by me. For that I am truly sorry, the letter continued. CNN reached out to a lawyer for Mukherjee, who declined to comment. Shaken baby syndrome. Medical experts use the term shaken baby syndrome to refer to a type of abusive head trauma that can result from violent shaking or shaking and impacting a baby's or small child's head, which can potentially result in death or permanent neurological disability, according to the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome. The group says about 80% of victims suffer lifelong disabilities and about 25% die from their injuries. Babies less than a year old are most at risk of abusive head trauma, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Nearly all victims experience long-term health consequences, which can include vision problems, hearing loss, developmental delays and physical disabilities, the agency says. Experts say that this type of abuse often happens when babies are crying inconsolably, as infants are prone to do, and a caregiver shakes them out of frustration or anger. In recent years, a trend has emerged in defense of those who cause abusive head trauma, with witnesses telling courts that the science behind shaken baby syndrome has been debunked. Some medical authorities have shifted to using the term abusive head trauma instead of shaken baby syndrome to acknowledge the abuse can be caused by actions other than shaking. While experts say the wording shift has been misinterpreted by some in legal and medical circles as doubt about the diagnosis, research published by the American Academy of Pediatrics shows this type of trauma is real and preventable. The Academy recommends pediatricians watch for the signs and symptoms of abusive head trauma and report suspected cases to authorities. Terry Mukherjee, 62, accepted a plea deal for the death of Benjamin Dowling, who died at 35 after a life of severe disabilities caused by a brain hemorrhage he suffered in 1984 when he was 5 months old while at Mukherjee's suburban Fort Lauderdale home. Investigators believed she caused the injury by shaking him. In a letter of apology read to Dowling's parents by her attorney, Assistant Public Defender David Fry, Mukherjee said she was feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by taking care of numerous children and struck him, causing his injuries. A Broward County grand jury indicted Mukherjee, who now lives in Sugar Land, Texas, with first-degree murder 3 years ago after an autopsy concluded Dowling died from his decades-old injuries. He never crawled, walked, talked or fed himself, his family has said. She voluntarily entered the Broward County Jail on May 29 after having been free on $100,000 bail since shortly after her indictment. Mukherjee, who had been facing a life sentence, was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 10 years of probation under the plea agreement. This isn't the first time Mukherjee has taken a deal in connection with Dowling's injuries, receiving an exceptionally light sentence after pleading no contest to attempted murder in 1985. Then 6 months pregnant with her third child and facing 12 to 17 years in prison, she was sentenced to weekends in jail until giving birth. She was then freed and put on probation for 3 years. At the time, she insisted she was innocent, telling reporters that her conscience is clear. She said then that she took the deal because wanted to put the case behind her and be with her children. Prosecutors called the sentence therapeutic, but didn't explain at the time. Rial Gaudiosi, then Mukherjee's public defender, said the sentence was fair under the circumstances. He died in 2009. Ray and Joe Dowling had been married 4 years when Benjamin was born Jan 13, 1984. Both Dowlings worked, so they hired Mukherjee, then 22, to babysit him at her home. Ray Dowling told investigators that when she picked up Benjamin from Mukherjee on July 3, 1984, his body was limp and his fists were clenched. She rushed him to the hospital, where doctors concluded he had suffered a brain hemorrhage from severe shaking. Mukherjee was arrested within days. The Dowlings told reporters in 1985 they were stunned when prosecutors told them minutes before a court hearing of the plea deal Mukherjee would receive. The Dowlings said in a 2021 statement that Benjamin endured several surgeries in his life, including having metal rods placed along his spine. He got nourishment through a feeding tube and attended rehab and special schools. The Dowlings had 2 more children and would take Benjamin to their games and performances. The family moved to Florida's Gulf Coast in the late 1990s. He died at their home on Sept. 16, 2019. Benjamin would never know how much he was loved and could never tell others of his love for them, they said. Benjamin did smile when he was around his family, although he could never verbalize anything. We believe he knew who we were and that we were working hard to help him. Shaken baby syndrome first gained national attention in the 1970s as an explanation for the sudden deaths of infants and young children who had no outward signs of abuse. It would be diagnosed if the child had swelling of the brain, bleeding on the brain's surface and bleeding behind the retinas. But over the past 25 years, research has shown that those symptoms can also be caused by genetic problems, disease and accidents. The University of Michigan's National Registry of Exonerations lists 29 shaken baby convictions that have been overturned since 2000. The American Academy of Pediatrics, which now uses the term abusive head trauma, says about 1 in 3,000 babies under 1 are abused annually by shaking and about a quarter of those are fatally injured. It says doctors should be alert to bruising of the torso, ears and neck in children under 4 years old and any bruising in infants younger than 4 months as signs of possible shaking. She voluntarily entered the Broward County Jail on May 29 after having been free on $100,000 bail since shortly after her indictment. Mukherjee, who had been facing a life sentence, was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 10 years of probation under the plea agreement.
As you leave the page, don't forget to hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you for watching.